Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Ask Rob and Rob.
Hey everyone, this is Ask Rob and Rob, the show where you give us your questions and we give you answers in return. It's a simple format, but it works. And the reason it works is because of that simple format, and it's also easy to get your questions in. So let's quickly remind you how to do that before we start answering the first question.
Yes, one piece of information required only. propertyhub.net/ask. That is it. Go there. You can send us a written question or you can send us an audio question to appear on this show and then brag about it to all your friends, just like Ryan's about to.
Hi, Rob and Rob. So my name's Ryan. I'm 23 years old and I'm still living at home with my parents, but I'm looking to get into property. And I'm not sure whether I should go down the route of going to get a buy-to-let to lend out to tenants, or whether I should go for a residential sort of house and then live in it for X amount of time, because eventually I'd be looking to rent that out to tenants as well. I'm happy to live at home whilst I have the property. Of course, I can do it up at the same time, but the goal is to get a property to rent out to tenants. So let's say I've got a deposit of between 30 to 50k. What would you say is the best route for me to go when getting my first property?
Hey Ryan, thank you for your question. You're in a great position and I'm pleased that you have this choice at such an early age, because if you get this right and continue to get it right, you could be in a very good place, in 10, 20 years time. So let's help you get it right. If you are happy to live at home and live at home for the foreseeable future, then I would be tempted to go for the buy-to-let option first. And the reason why is your own home is arguably not an asset. Rich Dad Poor Dad would argue very strongly against it being an asset, because while it may go up in value, you have to maintain it. A lot of money goes into those properties during your ownership, so it becomes a bit of a money pit. Hopefully that's offset by the capital growth you'll receive at the end. But again, the area you pick may not be the best for capital growth, because you're picking because of where you want to live, not because of an investment. Whereas if you go for the buy-to-let route, you suddenly can open yourself up to the entire country, because you will be limited to where you can live, because I'm sure of your commitments and your life that you'll want to live within certain areas. But when you say, okay, I'm open to buy-to-let, then suddenly the areas you can invest in are vast and huge, and there's lots of options there. It can actually be a little intimidating, but luckily we've got lots of content out to help with that. So that is why I think the buy-to-let route is the one to consider. Now, the reason why I'm not saying 100% do that and don't even consider the other, and the reason I've only gone as strong as suggesting that's the best route, is because will you be happy to live at home, say, in 5 years? Now, you might think yes now, but by the time you're 28, you might want to move out. Now, if you will have the funds at 28 to buy a home and then move out, then great. I mean, and it doesn't have to be 28, it might be 30, it might be 25, whatever. But if you have the ability to save up for another deposit over a reasonably short space of time, so that when you do want to move out, you can buy your own home, then great, definitely go and get your buy-to-let. If you can't do that, it doesn't mean don't do the buy-to-let, but you'll then need to go out and rent. And renting isn't bad. A lot of people say renting is dead money, but I've got a co-host of mine who's a big fan of renting, so maybe he can speak on that in a moment. But it is an option. You don't rule that out. That also gives you flexibility in life choices, particularly if you're going to buy a home and then think you might want to move or upscale within a few years as well. That's inefficient. So overall, I'm leaning to suggest go for the buy-to-let option, but that's me operating on a limited amount of information on your circumstances. But Rob, as a fan of renting and a landlord, is there any advice or words of wisdom you can give Ryan?
Yeah, I think the absolute key point here is how long you expect to be in a home for. Because if you're buying your first home, then there are various exemptions to stamp duty, depending on where in the country you're buying it. It might be nothing or it might not be that high. But even so, by the time you've had your legal fees and everything else, it's an expensive business. And then if you move in the future, you won't be a first-time buyer, so you will have to pay stamp duty all over again. So I'd say a lot of it comes down to how much certainty do you have about your future plans? Obviously, no one knows exactly what's going to happen, but do you know where you want to be living for the next, say, 10 years as a reasonable amount of time? And if you do you have the funds to buy that property now? Because if the answer to either of those questions is no, then buying might not make sense. I've lost count of the number of friends that I've got who ended up buying, say, a one-bedroom flat, then wanted to move in with a partner, have kids, move to a different area for work or whatever, and have ended up in a situation where they've had to rent out the property that they bought, and they're now back to renting themselves somewhere else, which is exactly what they were trying to avoid in the first place. But as with all these things, you never really know what's going to be the right thing to do. You're just making guesses about how the future will pan out. So all you can do is make what seems to be most likely to be the best decision at any given time. And hopefully you've got a list now of some of the things that you should be thinking about when making that decision. Okay, let's move on to our second question. This is from Corey.
Hi Rob and Rob, it's Corey here from Coventry. I've just purchased a one-bed flat near the university, and I think I bought the flat to add to the portfolio at the right time. Now the leasehold reform has been initiated, I was hoping you can provide a little bit more clarity on the general positives and negatives of this reform. Further points would include, do you think the reform is definitely going to be happening, or is it crucial on who comes to power between Labour and the Conservatives to get it finalised? Does this reform apply to both buy-to-let leaseholders and residential leaseholders? And finally, just some thoughts and predictions. Do you think that the ground rent will be capped in the future? As if I was to remortgage my apartment after refurbishing it, the ground rent in the year 2100, I know it won't be live at the time, however, will then turn to £250, which then automatically turns to an AST, which then requires a deed of variation. Having said that, do you think the deed of variation will be removed, or will those fees then be passed on to the freeholder instead of the leaseholder? Lots and lots of questions here, but I've been listening to the pod for the last 4 years, and I feel you guys are almost accurate and very trustworthy with your information. So who best to turn to other than Rob and Rob? Thank you so much for the information over the years. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Corey, thank you for your question, and give you a couple of quick and definitive answers here, followed by a little bit more speculation. So first, quick and definitive answer. Will leasehold reform happen? Yes, it is happening. Obviously, since you asked your question, we now know who has come to power, but it didn't matter anyway because the legislation was passed in the final days of the last parliament. So that is happening. Does it apply to both buy-to-let leaseholders and residential leaseholders? Yes, that's the other quick and definitive answer. A leaseholder is a leaseholder, but the use that you put your property to is not relevant for these purposes. And that's where the certainty ends. Then we're into speculation, because you asked about ground rent and whether that will be capped in future. And this was debated a lot in the course of this Act going through Parliament. It ended up not being in there. But if I were to speculate, I believe that ground rent will be capped or abolished or something very much like that in the future. And that's because the leasehold system as we know it seems to be on its way out. There's a lot about leasehold that was outdated or not particularly fair, and all that is slowly being dealt with. It's one of those rare things that everyone in politics seems to be agreed on and wants to happen. So already we've had a ban on leasehold houses. Already we've had a ban on ground rent for new leases. And capping ground rent on existing leases is much harder for lots of different reasons. But I suspect it will happen at some case. It's just a question of when, and when might not be soon, because it's already taken many years to get as far as we have with this. And it's going to be a matter of political will and priorities, and just frankly, how important this is to any given government compared to everything else that's going on that they have to deal with. But in your case, you say this is going to become relevant to you in the year 2100. I would like to think that by the year 2100, we would have more certainty around this matter. But as you pointed out, we're also most likely not going to be here to see it. So I'd say that for your current property, it's not something you need to be worrying about too much. But like I say, I do anticipate that there will be more developments in this area over the coming years. So keep on listening to the podcast and make sure you subscribe to the newsletter, propertyhub.net/pals, and we'll keep you up to date with everything that happens.
I've been to the year 2100. Not much has changed, but we live
underwater. Yeah.
Sorry, no more busted jokes there. Barely a joke, that was terrible. But don't worry, that's why we left it to the end.
It worries me that I knew what you meant. I knew exactly where you're going with that.
The fact you finished the sentence as well. So for you nutcases who've listened to this and continue to listen even after that, thank you. We'll be back next Tuesday. We'll also be back on Thursday with the Property Podcast. And of course, you'll find us in the Sunday Times answering your questions there. Until then, take care. Have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.